So this is a first in a series of videos which I'll be creating. The idea of these video series is to create an infrastructure which will comprise of a firewall. I'll be using the OPNsense appliance for that. What I'll also do is set up a Active Directory VM, which will be used for the domain in relation to creating a cluster which will host a SQL standard database, and in that I'm going to create a failover cluster. So the first thing I'm going to do is go through the installation of OPNsense into the IONOS Enterprise Cloud. So the first thing I need to do is get the appliance. So if I go to OPNsense.org, navigate to the download link, and then if I scroll down, I'll see various architecture choices as well as image types as well. The way in which this technology will work on our platform is that we'll install it as an appliance. We'll do some basic configurations in relation to the networking for the appliance itself. And then this system will run on our platform and act as a barrier to the internal systems which are going to be created. So the first thing we need to do is download the ISO image for the appliance. So in that, I'm going to select the AMD 64 architecture. It'll be running on a 64-bit platform. You have various choices in relation to the image type. For this, I'm just going to get the DVD image, which should be an ISO image. I'll also then look for a relevant mirror that I'm going to download from. So this is going to be from this example, University of Kent. Once I download the file, you'll see it's got a BZ2 extension. So this needs to be extracted via the likes of 7-zip or WinRAR, etc. as well. So I'll let that run and then extract the image. So with the image complete, what I'm going to do is basically extract that image itself. So if I just bring up my location of where the file is resident within. So the image is being downloaded. I've extracted the ISO from the image itself. What I need to do now is upload the image to the IONOS image repository. And for that, if you go to the Dataset Designer, go into Manage Resources, and then go into Image Manager, what you'll see are various images. If you've already got some in there, or if they're blank, then that's fine. We're going to upload the image we've downloaded and extracted into the FTP location. So if we go to the FTP uploads and then go to the region where you've going to create the virtual machines, in my case I'm going to go to London, United Kingdom for that. There's a couple of locations of where the images should be placed. The ISO image itself for the appliance is going to be uploaded into the ISO images folder in the relevant FTP server. So for that, what I would normally do is use something like FileZilla. If I go to my settings of my FTP locations, I can create a site. I can give the relevant name for the FTP server. I'm going to use the credentials which I would normally use for the Data Center Designer from IONOS. So what I can do is connect to that, type in the relevant password which I've got associated with the user. Once I'm connected, I can then go to the ISO images folder, look for the extracted ISO file, and this is really important. Just make sure you're uploading an ISO extension and not the BZ2 extension file itself. So once you've got that, it's then a matter of uploading the file into the ISO images. And then what will happen is once that's complete, IONOS will send you an email alert to say that the file upload was complete and it's currently going through a conversion process. And then once that's there, which should take about, 2 or 3 minutes really once the conversion completes, is that you'll actually see the ISO image in the listing. So if I scroll down, we'll see the ISO 20.1 image there. The other thing to note as well, initially the OS type is maybe something like unknown. You need to specify that it's a Linux ISO image. That way we can clarify the operating system type that's going to be used for the virtual machine itself. So with the image uploaded and ready to use, it's now a matter of creating the virtual machine configuration for the appliance itself. So what I'll do is go to the data center designer. I'm going to create a data center for this environment. So this will be a cluster demo, which I'm going to create. Cluster demo, and then choose the relevant location. In my case, it's at UK London. Click on Create Data Center, and then what we'll see is the standard workspace in relation to the creation of the virtual data center. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag a server template onto the workspace. We'll call this OPNsense firewall or whatever you want to call it. I don't think it really matters too much, just for your reference. Initially, a single CPU with 2 hyperthreads and 2 gigs of RAM is probably adequate enough for your needs. There is capabilities inside the OPNsense appliance to look at the performance, and from there you can look at scaling up, adding more CPU, more RAM to the virtual machine if required as well. What I'm going to do next is drag a hard disk to the virtual machine. 50 gigs is more than enough really for the operating system that's required, as well as the appliance binary files. So 50 gigs should be more than adequate enough. We can give this disk a name, so we're going to call it the boot disk. And the image we're going to select is no image, because we're not going to deploy any operating system on this disk at the moment. What we are going to do is utilize the ISO image to build the operating system of the disk itself. So for that, what I'm going to do is drag over the CD-ROM tile, select the relevant image. So again, go to my own images, and then look for the relevant OPNsense ISO that you've uploaded to the FTP server, which should now be visible in own images. Ensure that boot from device is selected, and then click on Create CD-ROM. That's really it for creating the virtual machine, so it's fairly straightforward. The other things we need to ensure is that we've got some network connectivity, so we can at least obviously connect into the appliance and do the relevant configuration. So initially what I'll do is connect up the first network interface card to the LAN. And we do definitely need a secondary NIC, which will be used for the internal traffic to the AD controller, as well as the SQL cluster that we're going to create as well. So we could, create another virtual machine, which is going to be hosting the AD controller. Or for the initial configuration at the moment, if we right-click on that circle with a cross, what we can do is go to Actions and then add a network interface card for the moment. So this will give us 2 network cards when we provision the changes. This will be the WAN interface, and then this orange network card will be the LAN interface that we will want to use. We can go over to the network settings. There is options obviously to enable the firewalling for things like the network cards. We can leave those disabled for the moment, because as this is a firewall server, it will protect the incoming traffic to that WAN interface using the relevant firewall rules that have been applied onto the system. So initially we can keep it disabled for the time being. On the secondary LAN interface, what we can do here is that we can either utilize the DHCP from IONOS, which will apply a virtual machine layer IP address to that interface card, and we can also specify the relevant address that we want to use here as well. So this example, I'm just going to apply a simple 10.10.1.1 address, which will be used for this network card. I'm not going to use DHCP capabilities for IONOS because I want to have this as a static IP for the moment. And again, I can keep the firewall disabled because this LAN interface is behind the firewall, so I don't need to worry about firewall rules at the moment regarding this LAN interface. So that's really the key infrastructure created and ready to be provisioned for the appliance. So with that, what I would normally do next is click on Provision Changes. I've got some information about that network interface card, which is that WAN IP address. Don't worry about this message for the moment because we will connect it up to other peers in the environment, but we can leave that okay for the moment. Click on Provision Now. And then the provisioning process will kick in. This takes about, I don't know, 2 to 5 minutes to provision. Once that's up, we can then go into the virtual machine and start creating the initial configuration for the appliance itself. So there we go, really quick. Okay, so if I click on OK, if I go to the appliance and highlight the focus against that server itself, go to console, and then what I should see here at the moment, if I just OK the warning message, it's currently going through its boot up process. And again, depending on, I guess, how much resources you apply to it, would pretty much determine how quick it would obviously boot up as well. So once that's there, what we'll do is go through the installation process, and then we'll go through the initial configuration for the appliance itself. Which again is fairly straightforward and quite easy to do. Okay, so this is the initial login screen that the ISO CD-ROM has got to. So the first thing we need to do is go through the installation process. So we'll log in as installer, and then the password for installer is OPNsense, which is obviously OPNsense, the solution we're installing, lowercase for password. And then we're presented with the installer screen, general information about what's going to be installed and the process. So we'll just hit return and then we'll start going through the installation process. Most of this is just hitting return, really accepting the default settings, which are adequate for the installation. We'll do a guided installation, so again, just hit return for that. We're going to utilize the relevant disk. So this is the boot disk which has been found. Again, hit return. For this deployment, as it's only a small disk, we're just going to go with the standard MBR mode. We don't have to worry about GPT or UEFI for the moment. So yeah, press the arrow key down and then hit return for MBR. We're going to go with the recommended partition size of 4 gig. So again, hit return. And then the installation process will commence. At the end of this, it will ask for the relevant password that you want to use for the root user for the appliance, which we'll add when this completes. Okay, we can see that the installation process is now asking for the relevant password that we want to use for the root user. So if we just enter that twice and then accept the password. Just use the arrow keys to move down to the relevant sections and then hit return to accept the password. Now that's complete, we can go and just hit reboot the machine itself, which will go through this process. We can at this point also switch back to the VM and actually remove the CD-ROM because we don't need that image on the virtual machine anymore. So we hit delete on the CD and then just provision the changes. We'll confirm that and use the relevant credentials for your account and then provision the change. Okay, that's now done. What we'll do is switch back to the virtual machine. You'll probably get a disconnect message in relation to the virtual machine itself. So to reconnect, we just hit the sprocket symbol for the VM, hit reconnect, and we should reconnect to the VM. So here you can see it's currently going through its boot up process at the moment. Yep. So we'll just wait for this to boot up. We should get a login prompt, which will allow us to start the configuration process for this appliance. So you may note that it's hanging on the configuring the various interfaces. It's actually hanging, well, it looks like it's hanging on the WAN interface. Well, actually, the configuration itself is trying to pick up that LAN IP address at the moment because it's not connected to anything, which is why it's currently hanging here at the moment. You can just let that go for the time being, and then eventually it will move forward with the rest of the startup initialization process. Okay, so it's now booted up and we can start to log in to the system and then create the relevant configuration. So if we log in as root and then utilize the password that you set during the installation process. And we're in. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is look at the assignment of the relevant network interface cards. So when we press number 1 for the option, we'll have 2 network cards listed as those are the 2 which are on the virtual machine. There's 2 adapters here. You can see the relevant MAC addresses that's been assigned to those. To ensure that you're, I guess, creating the relevant network configuration correctly, you can confirm the network card by switching back to the DCD, click on the server to focus there, go to network, and then you'll see the MAC addresses that are being used for the various network cards. The WAN adapter is using the 3E92 MAC ID at the end, and the other one is using the other MAC address here. The other important information is knowing what the primary IP address is that's going to be used for the setting up of this environment. So you may need to, well, you will need to look at the primary IP address as well. I'll use a static dynamic IP address at the moment, but this can be changed to a fixed IP address or a fixed public IP address. So what you can then do is tag a DNS a record against that IP address. But we'll keep this for the moment and then utilize this for the configuration. So 92 is the MAC address for the WAN adapter. So if I switch back to the console of the appliance, I'm not going to use VLANs on this configuration. It's asking me for which one is going to be the WAN interface. So 92 was that one, and it's on VTnet 0. So here we're just going to type in VTnet 0. And then for the LAN adapter, we'll just type in VTnet 1, just so we have a reference of the LAN adapter there as well. That's all we need to do for those new 2 network cards. And then we're happy with the configuration, just press yes to proceed. Okay, the first thing to notice really is the WAN address. So at the moment we do have the DHCP enabled for the adapter. It's picked up the correct IP address, but what's interesting is that IP address is obviously a /32 address. The gateway itself has got the same designation but with a .1 at the end. So as this is /32, to get to the gateway on the WAN, it's not going to be possible to do that unless I change the configuration. There's a couple of ways you can do that. You can either have a static route in the configuration itself, or you can amend the WAN adapter to use a static IP address of this IP here, but use a /24 designation for the subnet. That will allow us to reach the gateway. It's probably an easier process to do than having to modify the default routes, within the appliance itself. And just to simulate what the problem is here, so if I just do a number 7 to ping a host, and if I just ping, a standard address like Google DNS, I'm going to get host is down, so there's no gateway connected on that DHCP address at the moment. So if I just come out of that and I'll go through the setting up of the IP addresses. So I'm going to choose option number 2. I'm going to configure the WAN IP. I'm not going to use DHCP because I'm going to use that static IP instead. And then we're going to enter in the IP address. So that was 77.68.111.43 was the address for the IP address. We're going to use the /24 for the subnet so we can reach that gateway. And the gateway itself is 77.68.111.1 as the gateway. And then hit return. We're happy with the configuration to use that as well for DNS. We're not going to configure IP6, so I'll just hit return. It's going to set as DHCP, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. I'm going to keep the relevant protocol at the moment for the web UI. I don't want to revert to HTTP for the moment. Okay, so we'll just wait for that configuration. And again, just to double check that now we can actually ping out using the correct gateway. And again, if I just type in the 48s, we'll see we've now have a response using the relevant gateway. So everything network-wise for the public IP is working fine. What I will do is change the relevant configuration for the LAN. We set that to a 10.10.1.1 for the network interface card. So we'll just reference that back here on the LAN as well. So we'll change the IP address for LAN. We won't use DHCP for this. And then we'll just enter in the address of 10.10.1.1 with the 24 range for the subnet. We're not going to use the gateway address here for a LAN. That's not required, so we'll just hit return for that. We're also going to hit return for the likes of the LAN interface via the WAN tracking as well. You do have the ability to enable a DHCP server for your LAN here as well. So if you wanted to, you could say yes here, enter in the relevant range that the DHCP server is going to serve out addresses to, and then obviously configure the relevant configuration from there. In my demonstration here, all my servers are going to have fixed IPs, so I'm not going to go through this process in this video in particular. So I'll just hit return for the moment. Again, hit return in relation to changing the relevant protocol. And then we'll see now we have a UI address that we can use for the LAN adapter, and that's going to be the gateway address for our internal VMs that we create as well. So that's the initial creation at the moment for the firewall OPNsense adapter. What I'm going to do next is create a Windows VM which will attach to the LAN network, and then we'll just finish off the configuration of the firewall. I'll create a NAT forward rule on the system so we can follow that process as well. But that's it for this first video in the series.